Unknown. Mina sighed as she tied up the trash bag, plastic stretching under the weight of one too many empty wine bottles and fried chicken takeout boxes. Late night chores had become a habit since her divorce. Anything to avoid the quiet of her empty apartment in the evening. She grabbed her phone, slipped on her sandals, and made her way to the elevator, lugging the trash bag of burden behind her. It was nearly midnight, and the apartment building was eerily quiet, the dim hallway outside flickering with the dull glow of fluorescent lights, casting a sickly green hue. She pressed the elevator button, and the soft chime indicated it was on its way. Her routine was simple enough. Take trash to the bins near parking lots, separate recyclables, come back. A task so ordinary it should have brought her comfort, but it didn't. Not tonight. Her mind was elsewhere, wandering into dark corners, wondering why her life had taken a sudden downward slide into oblivion in recent months. Mina was lost in thought and barely noticed her phone vibrating in her pocket. She pulled it out, frowning at the screen. A message from an unknown number that simply read, "See you soon." She paused, standing in front of the elevator doors. More spam, she thought, but at least someone is talking to me, and she shoved the phone back into her pocket. The doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside. The familiar hum of the elevator felt comforting, the sensation of descending floor by floor calming her nerves. But it slowed to a stop and the doors slid open earlier than they should have. She looked up and saw it stopped on the 6th floor. Mina frowned as she peered into the empty hallway. She hadn't pressed any buttons, and the ground level was still further down. Probably a malfunction, she told herself. It's an old building after all. After a few seconds, the doors closed and the descent resumed. Her mind wandered again, but before she could lose herself in thought, the elevator stopped once more. This time on the 3rd floor. The door slid open, and another empty hallway. An uneasy feeling slowly crawled under her skin, so this time she immediately pressed the button to close the doors. To her relief, they softly slid shut and took her to the ground level without stopping again. Mina made her way towards the parking lot, a vast, dimly lit space stretching out and around the tightly knit cluster of apartment buildings. The designated trash area was at the far end, marked by large commercial bins, clustered beneath a flickering street lamp. As she began walking towards it, her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out, confused, as the message from the unknown number read, "Did you like it?" She wondered who this person was trying to reach. Maybe a couple celebrating an anniversary? Sure, we'll see how that works out, she thought to herself, as memories of past failed relationships raced past her mind's eye. As she got closer to the trash bins, she noticed movement. A figure hovering near her destination, just beyond the reach of the faint light. For a moment, Mina paused, her heart beating faster at the sight of another person out this late, but she quickly reasoned that wouldn't be unusual for another resident to be taking their trash out at this time of night. As she walked closer, her eyes drifted towards the shadowy figure as it lingered near the bins. There was something off about the way this person stood, almost too still. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, tightening her grip on the trash bag and picking up her pace. As she drew closer, her unease intensified. The person hadn't moved, not to throw anything away, not even to shift their weight. They were simply standing there, as though frozen in place. Mina's pulse quickened. She could feel the creeping sensation of being watched crawl under her skin. Still, she told herself not to panic. Maybe they were distracted, waiting for someone. Her sandals scraped against the pavement as she neared the bins. The air felt colder, heavier. She kept her head down, trying to ignore the growing discomfort pounding in her chest. Out of the corner of her eye, She could just make out the shape of the figure, a man, judging by the broad shoulders and height. But his face was hidden, cast in shadow by the unreliable street lamp that flickered overhead. She calmly gripped the phone in her pocket as the trash bag swung awkwardly in the grasp of her other hand. But Mina's steps faltered as she got closer. Her breath caught in her throat. The man's posture was familiar, rigid, like that of... Her mind scrambled to make sense of the growing dread that begun to engulf her. It wasn't until she was just a few meters away that her phone buzzed again. Her pulse roared in her ears as every nerve in her body signaled for her hand to stay still, as if to tell her, "Don't read the message." It was too late. Her heart stopped as she inched her gaze down towards the phone's ominously lit screen and read, "Answer me." Her stomach dropped as she looked up to find the shadows being lifted away by the flickering street lamp as it briefly illuminated parts of the man's face. It was Jisung, her ex-husband. A wave of nausea hit Mina, and for a few agonizing seconds she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her mind raced, her body frozen in place. Jisung's presence was overwhelming, his smirk widening with each step he took towards her, intent on revenge for leaving him, ending their marriage. Her grip tightened around the trash bag as if somehow it could shield her from the horror standing in front of her. The rational part of her brain was screaming at her to run, to get back inside, lock the doors, and call for help. But her legs refused to move. Jisung's eyes bore into hers, cold and deliberate. The silence was unbearable. The world around them stood still. Mina could feel the weight of his gaze, pulling her deeper into the dread she had tried so hard to bury. Her phone buzzed in her hand as the sharp vibration snapped her back to her senses, her body trembling as she gazed down again to read the message. "Did you miss me?" Her blood froze. She looked up, her terrified eyes locking with Jisung's. He hadn't moved. Her pulse raced as she took a step back. The messages were taunting her, trapping her into Jisung's twisted game as he took another step forward. His eyes narrowed as if daring her to make a move. Behind him, the street lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across his face. Mina stumbled backward, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears, her feet sinking into the concrete with each step. The trash bag slipped from her hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The noise shattered the silence like a starter's pistol, and Mina ran. Her legs burned as she sprinted across the parking lot, her breath shallow and frantic. Her sandals slapping loudly against the concrete, each step feeling heavier and more desperate. The phone buzzed again with another text, but she dare not look. Her breath came in ragged bursts now as she raced to her building's front door, hand ready to pound the security code into the keypad. Her fingers desperately scrambled across the numbered buttons as she ignored her phone's repeated message alert buzzing. The rhythmic trill of the keypad unlocked the door as Mina swung it closed behind her, retreating to the safety of her apartment building. She froze for a moment as the cold air pressed in on her. She knew the building was secure and looked back to find the quiet, vast, dimly lit parking lot with Jisung nowhere to be seen. The trash bins sat in eerie silence, the flickering street lamp casting long shadows across the parking lot. She hurried to the elevator, rapidly pushing the call button as the doors opened with their usual soft chime. Mina leapt inside, and for a brief moment she felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, Jisung came to his senses and wouldn't continue with this torment, that she was safe. With the adrenaline that was coursing through her, she hadn't noticed her phone's incessant buzzing. As the hum of the elevator guided her back to her senses, she looked down to see dozens of text messages sent by that same unknown number. The elevator chimed as it reached her floor. The door slid open, and Mina took a few steps towards her apartment as she unlocked her phone and froze. The words blurred on the screen as her vision tunneled, her mind spinning in confusion as the dozens of missed text messages all read, "I'll wait inside." She looked up towards her apartment door as the elevator closed softly behind her. The door creaked open, ever so slightly, as if inviting her into the darkness that lay behind it. From inside her apartment, a low, familiar voice whispered, "Mina."